Hi, welcome back. This is Andrew Sears again, and in this last session, I'm going to talk about change agents and diffusion of innovation. So you've gone through all this material, and the question is, what do you do with it? Well, one of the best tools out there is around the concept of diffusion of innovation and how do you work as a change agent within your institution. So that's one of the main things I'm going to talk about in this session. Before we go into that, I want to talk a little bit about some quotes on disruptive innovation in higher education that in many ways have gotten change agents in trouble in the past. So one of the quotes is the quote by Peter Drucker. Most people would say is the most prominent management guru of the last probably half a century at least. And he said 30 years from now, the big university campuses will be relics. So that was almost 30 years from now. It was 29 years ago. So obviously he was wrong. Clayton Christensen in 2013 said, in 15 years, U.S. universities may be, half of U.S. universities may be in bankruptcy. Now, the quote that I actually like in all of this, and this is something I saw whenever I was at MIT and the Internet Telephony Consortium, is Amara's Law, which is we tend to overestimate the effect of a technology in the short run and underestimate the effect in the long run. So I think in diffusion of innovation and disruptive innovation, I think that, Drucker overestimated. I actually think, it's hard to say this because Clayton Christensen's kind of the father of this field, but I think he might be overestimating. But I think that in the end, Amara's Law is probably going to be true, and we're actually going to underestimate the changes. So one of the other diagrams that's often, or I guess cartoons that's often used by Clayton Christensen in his talks is this one. And, it shows a professor going through an equation, and then he says, then a miracle occurs, and then it shows the other side of the equation, and the guy says, I think you need to be more explicit in step 2. Now, I think the reason why he uses that in his talks is because that's what change agents get accused of, is they get accused of, saying, oh, disruptive innovation is going to change everything, but they never really connect the dots. So this whole presentation was an attempt to connect the dots for many people, and obviously not all the dots are still connected because no one can predict the future. But those who are change agents, what you do is you study these dots, so you see the patterns. What you need to do to help others is you need to show them all the dots. So so that's a significant part of this. Now, if you look at disruptive innovation theory and you look at, where are we in disruptive innovation theory? We're at this location, I would say in time where a lot of these technologies are probably better than some of the low quality higher education, but it's not better than, even the medium, and definitely not better than the high quality higher education. So you have this history of proven data, and you have this disruptive innovation curve that's going up. And, disruptive innovation theorists say, well, obviously it's going to keep going. But, we got to recognize that that's theoretical data. Now, if you look at, I like to think about Moore's Law, and, we call it Moore's Law, but before it was Moore's Law, if you worked at Intel, it was Moore's unreasonable expectation on his employees, because he expected them to double the processor performance every 2 years, and it happened not because it was inevitable. It happened because a bunch of people at Intel made it happen. But the other reason why it happened is Moore actually understood the basic physics of the transistor, and he understood that there is no fundamental limitation for decades to this growth. And I would say that the economics of online and the internet are similar. There's no fundamental reasons in the economics of technology. There's no fundamental reasons why this growth rate would stop. So, but that doesn't mean that it's going to happen. It's going to happen if people make it happen ultimately, and they can make it happen in a chosen way to get a preferred future. So if one side says that the change agents don't prove their case, the other side often accuses the traditionalist of this cartoon. And it's, instead of risking anything new, let's play it safe by continuing our slow decline into obsolescence. Now, obviously, no one wants to do that. And that's, what skeptics should avoid. So if you're a change agent, I want to review a little bit of change agent theory. So this comes from Everett Rogers in Diffusion of Innovations. And the way it typically works with change agents is there's a change agency. So that is going to be a group that's trying to bring change. And then there's the change agent. And the change agent is internal to an institution. And that's important. So in working, with you with this course, hopefully, many of you taking this course are a part of an institution. So I'm playing the function of a change agency in providing this course. You're the function of a change agent, and you're trying to bring diffusion of innovation into your institution. So let's talk about what Rogers saw, because he looked at a pattern that happens with change agents. So what's the sequence for change agent roles? So, first you have to develop a need for change on the part of client. So, you have to assess, is my university or college, ready for that? Then you have to establish an information exchange. So this course I'm designing, so it could be an information exchange relationship. You can add other material, but if you see how all the dots are connected and other people don't, you need to provide them with that information. Then after they have that information, then you get together, you diagnose problems, you create an intent to change, and then you translate intention into action. And then the rest is just how do you continue that happening, because often what's happened in universities is you get the guy who's bringing a bunch of change, and then people don't like it, and then he gets thrown out, and then all of a sudden you're 2 steps backwards. So how do you see that all the way through? So some of the ways you can determine, and improve your chances of success, one is to have a client orientation. So, to put it in cultural terms, you have to be an insider to whatever institution that you're talking, you're trying to bring change. So you have to bring a diffusion program that's compatible with your institution's needs. You have to have, empathy with the clients, and this homophilia is basically saying you need to be culturally similar to the institution you're trying to change, and you need to be credible to those that you're changing. So with me as a change agency, I'm not going to be culturally similar. I'm coming from a different context than most of you, but you're internal in the institution, so you're going to have this homophilia is what it calls it, is the same culture, and then you're going to hopefully work this through with people who have credibility, work through opinion leaders. And ultimately, what you're trying to do is you're trying to increase your institution and the leaders there, their ability to evaluate innovations. So again, I'm going to come back to a slide that I started with. So there's the is versus the ought, the past and the future. So you have a preferred future. And what I've been talking about largely is around the likely future, the is. And the preferred future is internally driven. It's by your values. And then what I'm presenting largely is environmental. So, you as the change agent, you have your understanding of the organization's values, its strengths, its weaknesses. So what I'm trying to bring is a lot of helpful information, hopefully, on the environment, what changes are happening. And why I'm doing this course, to be honest, the biggest reason why I'm doing this course is because I want to improve my ability to innovate. And I want to learn from you. I want you to learn from me. I want to have a dialogue. And together, hopefully, we can make some of these preferred futures happening. Now, if you're trying to adapt to an organization, you have to look at, what are the constraints? There's real constraints. So, I lead an institution. There's a lot of things I would give advice to my institution that I can't do just because there's real constraints. If I had another $10 million, I'd have a very different strategy. Many of you have the same limitations. So lack of capital, you might have a current cost structure, you might have commitments to faculty, physical plant, other sunk costs, you might have political realities, you may have a lack of core competency and innovation, missional constraints, and the other part, and we'll talk about this, is potentially an outdated underlying worldview and myth, and that's part of what you have to discern, is how do you sort through that. Now, this course is one tool, obviously, and there's a lot of other things that you guys are doing to bring diffusion of innovation, so conferences, other forms of media network, but the key thing is how do you find the leaders in innovation, how do you bring that? to them. So with that, I want to talk about the difference between mission, methods, and market. Now, mission shouldn't change, but what's a challenge is what if your mission is defined by a particular method or a particular market? That's where you're going to have problems. And ultimately what you have to do is you have to get at the core. And there's the Simon Sinek, he goes to start with why. So it's you have your why, you have your how, and you have your what, right? So this also overlaps with Simon Sinek, the why, how, and the what. So the why is the core. The how might change, so that's your methods. The what, that's your market. So, some people, as I've talked with, many groups, I hear them talk about their mission, and in many ways they've defined their mission too much by the methods, and in some cases too much by the market. And I would, characterize, some of these folks as saying, our core competency is that we're the best plowmen in farming. Now, that may be true, but you have to also look at what are the external realities, what's happening in your industry. So, a better statement might be, our core competency is that we have strong plowmen, but ultimately behind that, you might say we want to be an organic farm. Now, a lot of traditional higher education is going to say we want to be the organic farm counterpart in higher education. Now, the reality with this disruptive change coming is, in many ways it has both the pros and cons of factory farming. And, everyone has a distaste for factory farming, but organic farming is still only 5% of the market. So the question is, and it's a fairly, most of the organic farms are fairly small. So the question is, out of the thousands of schools, are you going to be competitive enough to be in that 5%? And if not, what's your strategy ultimately? So I think that's something, these are deep questions to think about. Now, there's two other tools that I want to provide, and I'm going to provide links to these in the course. So one is the concept of this causal layered analysis. And I have a YouTube video that I link to, but basically the idea is it's the tip of the iceberg, and you start with a problem. So sustainability challenges to higher education in the United States. And then under that, you look at what are the causes. So, I've gone through some of these: the economics of online education, the rise of mega universities, cultural and demographic shifts, increasing cost. But even, beneath those are paradigms and worldviews. So there, you have this unbundling paradigm. You have the concept of emerging markets and the bottom of the pyramid strategies. You have the concept of cradle to grave educational ecosystem. And you have this concept that I call, education on demand, but really what it's going to be about, it's going to be how do you race with the machine rather than against the machine. And ultimately, what he talks about is there's metaphors and myths that, have informed higher education for hundreds of years, almost 1,000 years in its history. And some of those metaphors and myths need to shift to adapt to this new framework. Some of them need to stay, foundational. You're not trying to change the core of your mission, but you need to look at what's the foundation that is informing things. And I think part of what we're going to find in higher education, there's some myths that are just that. They're myths. There's not data behind them. And then there's other things where there's good data. There's a good core of why we're doing what we're doing. So another paper that I want to reference is a paper by Erickson, and it was actually written looking at Christian colleges and their mission orientation. But what he did, and he was really focused on values. How do you evaluate the values? And he talked about the difference between adaptive strategies that are very focused on the environment and interpretive strategies, which is very internal values driven. And I've talked with a lot of people that are, stick to your guns, do the hedgehog concept, and that's, can be a good strategy of staying with your core. But if, again, if your core is being a plowman, then that's going to be a challenge in the upcoming market. So you have to also look at the environment. But what he did is he said, what's your strategy, and what strategy do you look at depending on whether your market is new or the same, and whether your product line is new or the same. So I just want to reference that paper. I'm not going to go into the details of that, but that could be something helpful. So the last thing I want to conclude with is, some ideas for how to use this course in discussion group. So as educators, the primary thing we can do to bring change is to educate those who have the power to bring change. So, what I would encourage you to do is identify those in your institution that have the power to bring change. Have them review this course and any other helpful material, then organize some sort of, discussion group on the implications for your institution, looking at the change agent theory. What are the problems? What are strategies to move towards change? And then you develop some experiments to move towards change, and you make some of these changes. So hopefully you found this course to be helpful for you. Please provide feedback. I want this whole course to be like a Wikipedia type project where people contribute their innovation. The main reason why I put a ton of effort into pulling all this material together for free is because I want to learn from you. So if you've benefited from this, help me out in two ways. One, spread the word to other people. Two, contribute something that can help the cause here. I'm not asking for money. I'm asking for information. I want diffusion of information. So I want to learn from you. The other students want to learn from you. So that would be my encouragement. I'm going to continue to add and update to this course as I get information. If any of you want to talk with me, feel free to look me up and follow up with me. Thanks a lot.